I love the way that this conversation has had flow, because I've transitioned from one area where education and politics have intersected to the next. And parenthetically, we will do what we can. We'll connect offline about how we can, be a visible vocal voice. And that's part of this, we have a legislative reform committee that we plan to be in Austin with boots on the ground, this legislature.
Good deal.
It occurred to me as we were having this conversation, there is an effort to teach an alternative version of history. Not an effort, there is an ongoing movement to change history books, to rewrite history, and to essentially misrepresent, not opinions, actual facts about history. And being from Tulsa, I have always been fascinated about the fact that there was a race massacre. Now, it wasn't a riot; it was a massacre that that was documented. But for 60 years, they buried it, and there was no talk of it. There were people that they interviewed that lived in Tulsa their whole life and did not know that that incident had happened. And only recently has it become clear the facts, the scenarios, and in my opinion, the real facts of that case teach us something about where we are today. It teaches us what can happen when you allow mob rule, and when so I'm sure that doesn't sit well with you.
Yeah, I'm
Politics
over here,
around history. So
pacing back like a caged tiger, ready to share my heart on this one.
take it away.
So it's being born and raised in Tulsa, Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. North Tulsa is where I'm born. I bleed North Tulsa. I spent a lot of time on Black Wall Street. My Uncle Willie has one of the only Black businesses left on Black Wall Street. He's a 79-year-old barber that cuts 8 to 10 hours a day, and I still communicate with him consistently. He was one of the ones. My first job out of college was cutting hair in the barbershop.
Wow. Can you share a little bit about Greenwood for people that aren't 100% clear, just how phenomenal of a business district it was?
Yeah, Greenwood was 100 and some odd blocks of Black businesses, of the wealthiest Black community in the country in the early 1900s up until 1921. I actually used to teach a lesson on Black Wall Street as a middle school principal on Saturdays. It was reminiscent because my father, who started teaching civics in 1966, was doing the same thing, but he had to do it in hiding. He was a middle school teacher and had to invite students to a different location and teach about Black Wall Street. He was hired probably 4 years later as a 29, 28-year-old director of human relations, and was handed the desegregation plan and expected to execute it. So my father was responsible for the desegregation of schools in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So my sister and I grew up in a household watching him advocate, watching him push for change, watching him. He went on to be the CEO of the Urban League after a 30-year run in the school system, one of the first African-Americans on the cabinet and senior staff in the Tulsa public schools. So Black Wall Street has a rich history in my family. Miss Eddie Faye Gates, who is one of the only left survivors of the race massacre, used to come and teach lessons and speak to my students in my school. So I was married on Black Wall Street. Wow. I rode my bike up and down Wall Street. If you know Greenwood, Archer, and Pine, it stands for the Gap Band. Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. Charlie Wilson, lots of history.
You teach.
We know all of these folks, and it's near and dear to our hearts. Absolutely.
So this must be personal, because in my mind, to me, that is at the root of why they want to bury this type of history, is because it first of all, it convicts a guilty conscience. That's why you don't want to teach about it. But in my mind, they don't want to teach about Black Wall Street because it demonstrated what we could do as Black people. How personal must it be for you that they're trying to rewrite history and that they're trying to basically give legitimacy to dehumanizing us, devaluing our suffering, for centuries. As an educator, as a superintendent, it must be maddening.
I think what's most important, Dr. Odom or Reverend Odom, is the idea of acknowledgement. For the first time ever, one of the youngest mayors in the history of Tulsa came forward a few years ago and just flat out apologized for what occurred. Mayor Bynum, stepped forward. And that's one of the reasons why the archaeological dig has occurred, and the search for mass graves have been in place, and they found density in certain places where I can imagine right in my head. I know exactly where they are, behind the Home Depot, just north of downtown. So the acknowledgement has occurred. There has been great strides made on Greenwood for the first time in terms of investments back into the community. Will never be enough in terms of the number of lives that were lost, the number of people that were run off. Many of the small African-American towns in Oklahoma. My mom is from Tallahassee, Oklahoma, which is an all-Black town in just north of Muskogee, Oklahoma. If you've ever heard of an Okie from Muskogee, that's my mom. But my father's from a small African-American town called Langston, Oklahoma. There's a university, Langston University, grew up across the street from me. But I share this because there's a spattering of very small Black towns in Oklahoma. And many of the people that ran from Tulsa ran to some of these small towns. Some of them ran back up to Detroit and New York and never came back. So it decimated this community. So, whether it be reparations, whether it be really building this community back, it can never be repaid in the manner that it was lost. But a continual conversation around it, and our Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and I continue to have conversations around what that looks like. Being that some of my family is from the Creek Nation. Black folks, we love to say we got Indian in our family.
Really got Indian in here.
But I really, truly have, and we're on the rolls. And as a freedman, Creek Indian, these are Indians that had dark descent, and were not afforded some of the same rights that many other Native American tribes had. So unfortunately, the pigment of our skin not only lives around what it is to be African American on Black Wall Street, but also in Native American communities as well. There's a lot of history in Oklahoma, a lot of history in Black Wall Street. A lot of progress has been made, but there's a lot more progress to be made.
So, Superintendent House, listening to you talk and share your background, I'm very inspired, but I feel like it's kind of maybe what preempted you or prompted you to come into the HISD system thinking, I can make a difference.
I've always been one that's been up for a challenge, and never turned down a challenge. I was very fortunate to be a college athlete, so I like to compete, and I don't like to lose. I like to win, and I like, from an ethical standpoint, do things right. When I came here, there was an FBI investigation in place. There was, a former board member going to jail, potentially a COO going to jail. There was potential state takeover, which, we're still looking at the face of right now. And what I will say is, if, there is a board of managers that comes in, and if I am replaced in the months to come, I think I can look back and be proud of everything that was put in place. I was the National Superintendent of the Year runner-up for the country this past year, and that was an
Nice.
honor after being in this work for 1 year. For
Amazing.
the work that we've done. So we'll continue as long as we're allowed to continue to do this work and make positive things happen in this community.
Amazing. So we always, we have a special bonus being activist, but being activist for Christ and for God. I'm always fascinated to ask questions about faith. You're a man of Wheeler. And so as you navigate these sometimes treacherous waters and are meeting these challenges, what role does your faith and your relationship with God play in your day-to-day?
It's everything. It's everything. My wife and I start every morning and end every night in prayer.
Amen.
We've had scenarios where people have tried, the enemy has tried to literally knock at our door. My wife has been followed, quite frankly, outside of our neighborhood, and her window busted in with a brick. But our faith continues. That's just in the last few weeks, quite frankly. But our faith continues to be at the forefront of everything that we do. My attitude is bring it on, because I'm covered by the blood.
Amen. Well, one of the questions that we have in the chat is what type of programming is currently available for youth, adjudicated youth, who are returning back to HISD after being incarcerated?
It's an area that not only in HISP, we have a DAP program, which is more so for those that have had issues in schools. It's an area that definitely could use more support for students, because we know that once students have been adjudicated, it's a climb uphill from a societal standpoint. It's a climb uphill for an adult, quite frankly, not to mention for a student. But we invite those students back into the school setting to be a part of the wraparound services, the supports that we would have in our schools. We have, quite frankly, several students that are in ankle bracelets that are in school on a daily basis. They have the right to be educated as well. And we do just that. They may have to check in with POs on a consistent basis, but we'll also have counselors, social workers, wraparound specialists to be a part of the support system for those students also. The county, the Department of Education, Harris County Department of Education also has a couple of specialized programs for the most severe adjudicated adults as well. These are, pretty severe offenders, but they deserve an opportunity to learn. What you find, even with the most severe adjudicated, typically they are illiterate. Typically, they have had major problems with staying in school. So those things
at home,
at home, and those things have to be recognized, and the supports have to continuously be in place for them as well.
Excellent. I had another question that was sent that kind of, pardon the pun, it bookends the discussion about the teaching, the critical race argument, but specifically the book banning, removal of books from the classroom, that a particular brand of politics deem unacceptable. How's HISD addressing that? Or what power do you have when there's a
Pastor Odom, that's been a very, very interesting conversation, but it's been more of a suburban issue. You've seen a lot of middle class, upper middle class African Americans move to suburbs where they're one of the only Blacks in those communities. So you're seeing more of that in Katy. You've seen more of that in Spring. Of course, 80% of the kids that we have are kids that fall under the poverty line, 20% don't. And a majority of the kids in HISD are Black and Latino. So there hasn't been as many issues around the idea of critical race theory. Of course, critical race theory started at the collegiate level and was a course that was taught. We've had very few issues, but we have a process that if someone sees or has a piece of literature that came from one of their schools or our schools, that they can appeal to the school that they have a concern with that particular book and go through the process of potentially banning that book. We've had nobody to contest that in one of our schools and go through the ban process that I know of. If it has happened, it's been on a very small scale.
Good, good. There's another question about safety. And the person says, are there plans in place to enhance safety measures at older campuses? For example, closing the entrance areas like newer buildings, closing the entrance areas like newer buildings.
So this is a conversation that is gaining quite a bit of momentum in the legislature. If you all don't know, the 88th legislature that is underway as we speak, probably from a financial standpoint, has the largest pot of money floating around in several years, probably 15 to 20 years. So we truly believe that there are going to be some set aside specifically for safety. Now, as you all know, HISD, the last bond issue that was done in HISD was in 2012. And to put it plain, that's absolutely ridiculous. A school district the size of HISD needs to be doing bond issues every 3 to 5 years. To put it even more perspective around this, we have deferred maintenance. When I walked in the door in HISD, deferred maintenance, stuff that has built up on a stacked up list of $2 billion. And what that means is that we've missed on opportunities to move forward with the bond issue. One of the problems with looking at a potential bond issue right now, because I'd love to put one on the ballots for November, but we are in the midst, the most recent Supreme Court case changed a lot of minds, because you have to have support from your local organizations. I won't dig into who those organizations are to run a successful bond issue. You also have to of course, pass it by a super majority at the election boxes to get it done. So safety is I believe we're in a very important time in the legislature where there's funding there. A lot of that funding will come to fruition. Now, there are things that we have put in place. Every one of our campuses has, an entry point that is locked, and you have to have or be buzzed in or have a certain kind of ID badge that will buzz you in. So that is a safety measure. We have a majority of our campuses, or a big majority of our campuses, that has, fencing, or but there are issues sometimes with the fencing and the gates working, and that's the deferred maintenance that I'm talking about. So we're working very hard. I'll be doing a budget amendment. I'm in the midst of going through budget workshops right now with the board. Today, we had our first budget workshop because this district has had a deficit for quite some time, a $200 million deficit. And even though I inherited it, I'm doing my darndest to do what I need to do to eradicate it. Last year, I cut $60 million out of the central office. This year, this coming year, I'll probably be cutting an additional $20 million out of the central office. I'll also be cutting some other supports in the district as well, our ADA hold harmless, some other things that we're going to be recommending to the board, because I'm not going to sit idle and kick the deficit down the road. So safety is very important. Safety, luckily enough, I think we'll have an allocation coming from the state legislature this year, but there are several other things that need the support of a bond issue. But unfortunately, the political conditions are not optimal right now for a bond issue in my, in my estimation.
Yeah, and I know we're running short on time, and I have something I want to ask, and I'm gonna tie it into a question that one of our educators actually asked, Sister Kimberly Satterwhite. You kind of met her there. She was talking about there's this huge deficit, and as enrollment declines by 20,000, what are the plans to increase enrollment? And as you were talking about the bond, I was born in Chasewood, which is in Missouri City, and lived in Quail Valley. And there was a year that HISD and Fort Bend played sports together. That same stadium and the same football, basketball, and baseball stadium is still the same HISD field that everyone uses, while Katy has a $2 million football stadium. To me, that's where you could invest money, and that could be an enrollment tool. If you were able to invest in the athletics, at least. Is that on the table? Is that something that's even being discussed?
It's a great question. And one of the things that we did this past year is that we studied all of the bond issues across the state, the entire state. We studied them, and we watched to see what passed, and we watched to see what did not pass. And what people did not vote for post-pandemic were basketball arenas, football stadiums, auxiliary buildings. What they did vote for are the improvement on school buildings, additions, anything that has to do with teaching and learning. While those things are absolutely wonderful, and from an athletic standpoint, our students deserve what you'll see in the suburbs, these suburbs may only have a handful of high schools with a tax rate that is exorbitantly higher than what you'll see. We also have a birth rate in Houston that's much lower. We have more dog parks and dogs running around than students on bus stops now in the 3rd Ward, quite frankly. So you're seeing many of the families that lived in the core of the city that are now going to your Springs because they can get more house that's less expensive. I pay way too much in the 3rd Ward, but I want it to be in the core of the city. I want it to be where I am for the reasons I'm sure you all know and understand. But many people aren't able to do that, and they're going where their dollar can be spread thinner and they can get more home. So that's been a very interesting dynamic in terms of the number of students that have been lost. There's several different reasons. I'm in constant communication and know the superintendent in the Chicago public schools, the New York public schools, Philadelphia. We're all dealing with very similar situations. The 10 largest school districts in the country, I'm in communication with those superintendents on a consistent basis. And it's not just an HISD thing. It's the core districts in our major cities that are seeing some of these similar issues.
I'll go to Beth. Jen.
Yeah. And this is going to be our final question to kind of close us out. And thank you so much for your time. And again, the information has been wonderful, and we so appreciate you. And just know that anytime that you would want to come back and share and talk to us in the ministry, you are more than welcome. We love to have you back again. This question comes, though, as we went through the pandemic, one of the things that stood out was the technology gap that exists within communities of color, and how that impacted the educational process for students. I'm just curious about what are, or if there are more partnerships to come between HISD and maybe corporate partners to help us address some of those issues.
Great question. Of course, the pandemic, as many would say, creeped up on us. And from a technological standpoint, many school districts were not completely prepared to have the necessary hardware to send out with students. And I've talked to hundreds of students, and I'm in schools. I do about 6 school visits every Wednesday, and talk to student after student, parent after parent, teacher after teacher, principal after principal. And it's one of the things that, you know, students will tell you is that they felt like the in-person opportunity for them to learn was a more optimal opportunity for them to learn. But what we have done since that time is continue to close the gap by doing a couple of different things. Number one, one-to-one technology exists now with every one of our high schools and a majority of our middle schools. So students are assigned a laptop computer at the secondary level, which is a big number of our students in the school district to take home, back and forth to home. And many of their lessons are provided through that means of technology. My daughter, who's a senior in high school this year, you know, keeps hers glued to her on a daily basis. We have a connection with Verizon, and Verizon on the front end of the pandemic not only provided laptops at the middle school and support for laptops, but also Wi-Fi hotspots as well. So we're continuing that work. We have the responsibility for the first time this year to do all of the STAR testing, the end of school year testing on computers. It's all been paper and pencil for the first time. But even at the elementary level, we'll be doing STAR testing from a computer standpoint. So at the elementary level, we're one-to-one, but students don't get a chance to take that technology home. They have enough technology to have essentially an opportunity to either get it when they get there and put it on their desk and utilize at school, or be in a computer lab at some point to ensure that they have the opportunity to stay ahead of the digital divide and be up to speed on what it is that they need to learn to be the responsible citizens from a technological standpoint.
Thank you. Reverend Odom?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your time. It exceeded my expectations, and your passion, what you've overcome. And, you know, I think out the box. I would love to see you come teach about Greenwood at some point and do something for our kids on a Saturday. How appropriate would that be? You could teach on a Saturday. We talked about that earlier today.
Love to.
God bless you, man. We'll be praying for you, and we will put some boots on the ground in Austin in some way.
Yes.
And so we can connect with you offline about that, how we can join you.
Much appreciation. More than anything, we appreciate all the thoughts and prayers on a daily basis to be able to get this work done and do what's right for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you.